And so, now it is my great pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker. Leah Henderson received a BA from Tufts University and her MFA in writing from Spalding University. Her short story, Warning, Color May Fade, will appear in the upcoming young adult anthology, Black Enough, Stories of Black Teenhood in America. Leah's debut middle grade novel, One Shadow on the Wall, that's the book she will be discussing today, and it is set in Senegal. And it was sparked by one of her many adventures abroad. She is currently working on a number of other projects, and so wonderful, she lives here in Washington, D.C. So let's welcome Leah Henderson.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here, Brenda. Thank you for asking me to come. So I'm going to share a little bit about my story in writing One Shadow on the Wall. And basically, about 5 years ago, I was on a trip in Senegal. And I had been to Senegal a couple of times before. I'm an avid traveler. And on this particular trip, I was in a car with some friends. And I looked out the window and I saw this boy. And he was sitting up on this wall. And something about him just struck me. It just he got in my head. And I remember grabbing my camera right before we were about to zoom on down the street, and I took a picture of him. And this is the picture that I took. And so throughout the course of the day, I remember continuing to think about this boy, doing all kinds of stuff. At that point, I wasn't doing really touristy things, but I was hanging out with my friends and just enjoying the day. But he just kept coming back to the forefront of my mind. And I didn't really understand why, I didn't know why. And then later that day, when we were driving back into town, he was in the same area. He wasn't sitting on the wall anymore, but he was in the same area. And I remember thinking, stop, 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 I'm getting out of the car. And I ran over to him because I wanted permission to take his picture. And I asked him if I could take his picture, and he told me that I could. And I had asked him if he could sit up on this wall so that the boats could be in the background and the water could be in the background. But he said, no, I want to stand. And so a friend of mine was translating for me. And he was like, no, I want to stand. And I said, okay. So I was busy framing the image, and I wasn't completely looking at him at that moment, and I was just trying to make sure that the bus and some of the things weren't in the image, so I cropped them out. So I take the picture, I tell him thank you, and I start to walk away, and I look down at my camera, and I froze. And I just remember thinking, I get it. And this is the picture that I took. And for me, in this picture, he's saying to me, I dare you not to see me. And as a writer, I was trying to process this picture and my feelings about the strength that I saw in this boy, and this boy that had stayed with me all throughout the day. And so I told my friends bye, went back to my apartment, and I wrote a 10-page story about just what I thought his day was like. It wasn't, he was just my inspiration for this, and I was just trying to process who he was. And it was my way of saying, I see you. And I was in graduate school at the time. And as I was on vacation, I needed to send to my professor about 50 pages of writing, and I had about 40. And so this little story that I thought no one would ever see, I kind of looked at it and I was like, either I write something new or I send this in, let her give me all of the errors that I've done, all the things that I've done wrong, and then put that back away, and it's just for me. And so at the end of the day, I decided, okay, I will send her the story. But she didn't make marks on it. What she said to me, she wrote me back and she said, you know, this is the start of a novel. And I felt extremely apprehensive, and I said, no. This isn't the start of a novel. This is just something that I was doing to process an experience that I had, and it's kind of a personal experience. And she was like, no, this is something that needs to be shared with kids. And I was new to writing for children. I had been writing for adults before that, and this particular professor had said to me, I think you should take some of my classes. And so this was my first class with her. And so this was my first experience with her. And she was telling me to write this book about an experience that I didn't know. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I think I'm going back to writing for adults. And she said, no, I just want you to think about writing this work. And so I started kind of trying to figure it out, but at the same time I was very hesitant because it wasn't a story that was familiar to me. And she just said, I just want to see 10 pages. And my main character, his name is Moore. And she would say, I just want to see 10 more pages or more. Just show me 10 more pages. And when I was having my launch last year, I realized when I was speaking to someone that she never corrected any of those 10 pages I sent her. She just always asked questions and always got excited about seeing a new character emerge on the stage and was like, what's going to happen with that person next? And I realized it was just to, it was just to keep me going. And even though I did write those 10 pages for her when the semester ended, I was kind of excited to put it away because I was still very apprehensive. And my next professor sent him my 50 pages, and he goes, a little birdie told me about more. I want to see more of more. And I was thinking to myself, don't they get it? I don't know what I'm talking about. I really don't want to do this. And I dragged my feet again, but I'm up for challenges to a certain extent, and so I sent the 10 pages. And then when I was graduating, I was like, okay, finally, more is going in a drawer. And there was a woman who was coming to speak at our university, and somehow she got 60 pages or more somehow and came up to me after graduation and said, what's going to happen with More? And I said, More's going to take a little rest. We're going to take a little rest. And she said, I think that's a mistake, and I will do anything in my power to help you finish More's journey. And for the first time, I was thinking, why don't they just get it, and why don't they just leave me alone? And but this boy, he still was in my head, and he was still in my heart. And so I said to her, I appreciate that, and thank you. And I kind of walked away, still thinking, no, I'm not going to do anything with this. And I remember telling my parents. And when I was growing up, just to give you a little idea of the type of parents that I have, they were always trying to show my brothers and me our possibilities in the world. And when we didn't see them in the books that we read, when we saw images of people that were supposed to be like us but were nothing like us, and these hurtful feelings that we had, my parents made sure that they found positive representations for us to understand that there were possibilities for us. And one time, when my brother was playing outside with some friends, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and my brother was like, I want to be a cowboy. And the kids were like, you can't be a cowboy, cowboys aren't black. And I remember he told my parents, and literally like 4 weeks later, my parents packed us in the car in Boston, drove us to Colorado, opened the door and said, get out and go see yourselves. And we were at the Black Cowboy Museum. So my parents did stuff like that over and over again to make sure that we saw ourselves. And so when I told my dad about my professors and all this, so he knew about my journey for the 2 years, and he looked at me and he said, you're not the child that your mother and I raised if you don't not figure out how to not stand in the way of that boy seeing his possibility on the page. And from that moment on, it changed. It was a different journey for me. It was about me trying to find the authentic story for this boy. And so I was fortunate enough that my parents sent me back to Senegal for Christmas, and my dad and my mom were like, go figure this story out. And so I spent a month just watching and asking tons of questions and seeing all that I could see to try to understand this boy's world. And while I was there, I started seeing my characters kind of emerging in the people that were around me. So my main character, Moore, and then some little girls that I saw became his sisters. And this gentleman became one of my favorite characters named Dimba. And I have a very dear Senegalese family that's close to me. And the grandmother used to have all the kids in the neighborhood come over to the house on Fridays for lunch. And one day, this gentleman with dreadlocks came in, and I couldn't understand a word he was saying. But what I saw was that everybody lit up when he came into the space. All the kids started laughing and giggling, and I was like, that is Moore's protector. That is Moore's friend. And as you learn in graduate school, they're like, orphan the children, you can't have parents, you can't have this, you can't have all this, and the children need to solve the problems. And in all of my stories, when I started writing, they were like, Leah, the parents can't be there. And I was like, but in my life, my parents are so much a part of everything that I do, and they're there. And they were like, no, you gotta do something. Kill off the parents. I was just like, I can't do that. So I kind of found a compromise, and the mother comes back as a spirit, and the father comes back as a voice on the wind. And so they're very much a part of Moore's journey through a story. And so I started seeing all these people in the markets and things that were kind of coming to life for me for this story. And then there was this group of boys that was walking through the market area. And they weren't doing anything wrong, but they had a presence and people were stepping aside. And for me, I started thinking, Moore needs some problems. Moore needs some antagonists in his life. And so they kind of stayed in my head for that role. And then I took a trip to Mali, and I was in Janae, and I was walking through a little side street, and I came upon this door, and I know you can't see it very well, but it says the Wassa Boys. And in my head, I was thinking, my boys from that Senegalese market, what could they be doing? And I asked somebody kind of what this was about, and they had said that these were some boys that had left Dora, and they had kind of banded together as this group, and this is where they lived. And so I kind of knocked on the door, and I peeked inside, and they had rap posters and different things on the walls, and it was a very interesting experience for me. And so then I started thinking about, these are going to be my boys. These are going to be the boys that I saw. But one of the things that was coming in my head, because I realized these boys had come from an experience that was a bit traumatic in their Dara experience, I thought about Chimamanda TED Talk about the danger of a single story. And for me, going back and thinking about all those times where we were portrayed in such an awful light was something that I was grappling with, and I was having a very hard time coming to terms with trying to put my characters in danger and trying not to show my characters in the best possible way. And my professors were like, Leah, it is still fiction and it is still a story, and you still have to put them in danger. You still have to give them trouble. They still have to make mistakes. So every time I tried to make something just a little bit bad, they were like, no, throw them in there, throw them in. And so that's kind of where my Danka Boys, and that's those boys that I saw in the market, that's where their story began. And so they were, like the Wassa Boys, they left Dara. But when they left the Dara, the thing that I really wanted to have children understand is that they left as a family. They left protecting each other, and so they went from a bad situation, but even though they continued to wreak havoc, they had a brotherhood that was a bond that no one could come between. And so I wanted to make sure, even though they were secondary characters in my story, that they had a fully rounded story and a fully rounded world, because I did not want there to be any question of why someone is bad or why someone is good, because it's not always as clear cut as that. And so then I started looking at Dara's, and there are lots of different experiences and there's lots of work out there. And I think one of the things that I realized and kept coming to is it's so much easier for people to show negatives. And so you always see, like if you just Google it, the types of images you see are more of the negative images that are out there. And so even though my boys were running away from a bad situation, I was grappling with, is this my story to tell? And if I tell this story, is this going to be the definitive story about what this experience is? And so my hope is that from my book, and hopefully people reading my book and putting the word out about my book, that there will be other stories, that there will be other perspectives on this, and that this is only one. And so as I try to write and I talk to kids, we talk about the experiences that all my characters have, and we try to relate them to universal themes and different things like that. And so in my book, as I started going through, even though the Dora and my boys are a small part of the overall story, they have a larger part in the conversation of my story. And so as I continued to write, I got excited about who these boys were and what made them bad and what made them good, and their relationship to Moore and how they wanted him to be a part of it, and how Moore needed to figure out a way within himself to either journey with these Danka Boys or find his own path. And so that's kind of what One Shadow on the Wall is about. So thank you very much. And so I am open for questions. Does anyone have a question for me? Yes.
How did you first start traveling to Senegal? You said you have been there several times.
So, like I said, avid traveler. My family we travel all over the place since I was very young, and we had really wanted to go to Gore, and so that was our first trip there when I was in, I might have just been graduating from high school, and then I had gone a couple times after that, and then I actually moved to Italy for a while, and I had a lot of very good Senegalese friends. And they were like, come home, come home. So that was on that particular trip. I had gone home with some friends. Yeah.
I noticed in the book that you have a lot of well-off words and phrases.
Yes.
And at first I looked for a glossary, and
Yes.
then I said, oh, well, I think it's the context, and so I could figure out the context in which the words were used. Can you talk a little about that
Sure.
process?
So I actually, when I was writing, my character Demba, basically in the beginning, my first drafts, he just spoke Wolof. And I was wondering if my editors at Simon & Schuster were going to allow that to stay. Because you hear a lot of conversations just on the level of, this name is too hard to pronounce, or, you know, we have too many of these words and kids have to think too much. And I get frustrated because I'm like, you know, the percentage of our population that comes into a space and has to deal with this every day, you guys need to deal with it sometimes. And I was at a conference yesterday in New York on the color of children's literature, and somebody was like, you know what, it's your time to get itchy. If it's, you need to work through that. And so I was very fortunate because my editor felt the same way as I did, and so I was able to keep it in. One thing that I needed to do, because I don't speak Wolof, is I contacted probably 12 people to either read for me or ask questions of, so some professors that were at universities, some students at universities in Dakar and St. Louis, and different places. And I always tell this story about having people check your work when you're telling a story outside of your own. And I had this 13-year-old boy who wanted to read. And when you hire these sensitivity readers, it is a job, and you are expecting that they will be looking at this very deeply. And I told him I expected the same from him, and that he was going to sign a contract and I was going to pay him for his services. And at the end of him reading, he said, "Miss Leah?" And I said, "Yes." I was like, "I don't know if you know, but you have a dog, and you named it after a famous Senegalese prophet." And I just remember thinking, I've had how many people read this book, and not one person said this about this, and I knew anything that would have been the thing that was remembered. And I just remember thinking to myself, this is why you write for kids, because kids see everything, kids notice everything, kids will call you on what you make mistakes for. And this is why you're also so scared, because you want to do it right for them. You don't want to mess it up for them. I remembered what it felt like. And so that little boy has a near and dear place in my heart forever. But definitely, and I still made mistakes. You know, there are things in the printing that are still not right. And I've gone to my editor to get them fixed and to try to get them fixed for reprintings and things like that. And so it's a continuous journey of learning for me about this subject and about, telling these stories in general. Anyone else has a question for me? Yes.
What was the time span of the years when you were seeing these people and getting these experiences?
Okay.
I'm asking in the context of what was going on in the country.
So this is year 6. So I was there, oh gosh, I'm really bad with dates. But yeah, so I'm on year 6, and I've been now a couple more times since I started writing. I'd gone a couple more times just to kind of get my facts, or try to get my facts straight. But yeah, it's been 6 years to actually, that's not true, because it was 6 years last June when the book came out, is when it was 6 years. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Yes.
Was your visit to Dora, to the slave market, was that in your mind very much as you met these children and wrote this book?
So actually, like I said, I had gone there when I was graduating from high school that first time. And on subsequent visits, I'd gone back to Gore. And I think just everything about Senegal was in my mind, because it's such a fascinating place. And there are so many different walks of life in one spot that I don't think people really realize that, and they don't really understand that. So trying to make sure that I showed, even though I was showing only a small part, I really wanted to make sure the heartbeat of that place was there. So Gore and other places that I visited there were definitely in my thoughts as I wrote. They definitely were. Yes. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So my name is Tiara. Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I'm an education major from Brooklyn, New York, and I personally was just fascinated just by listening to everything that you were saying, listening to your journey, and listening to how you got to where you are right now. And one word that stuck out to me a lot, like just in my head, like while listening to you, is brave. And I feel like my question is, what triggered you to be so brave to not only to do something that was kind of outside of your comfort zone, because you said that you were used to writing things for adults, but then to do it in something, about a culture that is your own.
So, yes, thank you. So for me, it really goes back to my parents, and going back to, I might not have appreciated it as much when I was growing up, because literally we would take trips across country, and visit colleges when we were 6, 7, 8, and go on college tours. And the people would be like, who's the prospective student? And we couldn't touch the ground, when we were sitting in the chairs. And my parents would be like, they're right there. And the kids would be like, who? And they'd be like, those are the prospective students. Those are the ones that need to see what the possibility is for them later on, because we do not always see it. And one of the things for me, I don't know that I was really brave as much as I was so afraid of doing harm. And so I just remembered all those times when people told me that I couldn't do something. No matter how many times I showed them that I could, they still would say that I couldn't. And I remember one time when I went to a prep school called Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. And it's a really good school, it's a competitive school. And I got pretty good grades. And we had to do an assignment, and we had to do a 30-page short story. And I was so excited, and I wrote this story and all this, and I handed it in to my teacher at the end of the month. And I remember feeling like, yes, I did this. I think I really did a good job. And my teacher called me into his office, and he started telling me, I can't believe you did this, and saying all these things to me, but none of them sounded very positive. And so I started getting confused, because I thought, well, maybe I just really had it wrong. And as he kept talking, I realized he thought I plagiarized. And so for me, that was one of those experiences where I've always gotten good grades in his class. I've always been willing to answer and go above and beyond to do anything that I could. and he still doesn't think that I'm good enough to do this. And so those are the things that I remember, and those are the things that when I saw that voice saying to me, I dare you not to see me, those are the things that I held on to and that kept me going, besides my parents and my friends and all these people that just stepped on my path to say, you're not stopping, you're not gonna put this story away. So I don't know how brave I was. I think I was definitely motivated more by my fear of letting them down. Yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, I just wondered if you could explain the process with the illustrator that worked on the cover, and if you were happy with that process, because I know that can be problematic sometimes. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
So I'm laughing because Brenda knows about this process. So when I got my contract from Simon & Schuster, I was still feeling very much like, I'm not sure you really want this story. I'm not sure it's ready yet. And so it all happened very, very quickly, like literally in a week. And then after I signed my contract, I don't hear from them for 9 months. Right? And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, they realized they made a mistake for 9 months. Then all of a sudden I get this email, Leah, we have your cover. And I'm like, we've never even spoken, but I have this cover that is, and in the email it says final. And I was looking at it and my heart sunk because there was not a hut in my book. And my book takes place in a fishing village. So in my mind, I'm thinking of blues and water and all kinds of things like that. And this is what I have. Now, I love the mother, the spirit of the mother, because she stays near the home and she protects the kids. And I loved that. But I was like, this hut, front and center in my book, is a problem for me. So I talked to my agent, and my agent felt just as strongly as I did. And we went back to Simon & Schuster and told them that we would like for it to be removed. And they wrote us back and said, if there is one hut in Senegal, that hut remains on your cover. And at that point, you take some deep breaths, because I am a debut author. And you realize that probably my book is pretty long for middle grade. And when I sold it, actually, it was not that long. We added 30,000 words to my book. But what I realized is there are different battles that I'm going to have to go through. And is this the one that I'm going to start with? Because it's going to define my relationship with them. And I haven't even got my manuscript yet to do my editing. So is this how I really want to start this process, when there are things that I truly and absolutely want to advocate for? And yes, this is the face of my book, and this is the first thing that people see. But I felt like maybe if I can fix some things within, I can work through it, because they were not changing it. Because the illustrator, you do not have a relationship with the illustrator at all. And in my case, it was even harder, because there is a very well-known author who was doing a debut middle grade novel. And they pay him a lot of money. They do not pay me a lot of money. They pay him a lot of money. And they hired this illustrator to do his cover for his debut middle grade novel. And my editor, trying to take this opportunity when this man came into the office, she's like, I got this debut author. And she just kind of asked him, not thinking he'd say yes. And he asked to read the manuscript, and he said yes. So then they had to pay him. They weren't gonna change it. So it was a battle that I realized that I wasn't gonna win. And so the only thing that they did change for me a little bit is their features were protruding more, and I asked them if they could tone that down a bit. And I asked them, somebody said to me, are those dread heads cannibalism? They thought the fish were dreaded people in the first. And so that was the only thing that they did change for me. So they look more like fish. But that wasn't a battle that the hut's still there. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else have a question for me? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'd love to be here.